stop thinking about him. I wake up thinking about her. I go to bed thinking about him. There's somebody camping in my head. And so those are the ones we put in the machine. In the machine, we do three things. You bring in a photograph of your sweetheart, and you bring in a neutral photograph, a photograph of a person who calls forth no positive or negative reactions. And you look at the photograph of your sweetheart for 30 seconds. You lie in the machine. There's a mirror over your face. I put myself in 3 times before I put anybody else in. I thought it would be unethical not to. I happened to have been in love at the time. And, and for my neutral, I used the doorman. I didn't tell him that. I said, "Can I take a picture of you?" He's a nice guy, but he doesn't do anything for me, you know. So anyway, what happens?
Unusual doorman.
Yeah. So you look at a photograph of your sweetheart for 30 seconds, and then you look at the neutral photograph for 30 seconds. The problem with that is that when you're really in love with somebody, you can't stop thinking about them. So I needed to have a distraction task. And so the one that I chose was a standard psychological one where you cast a large number on the screen, like 4,289. And you have to look at that number and just mentally, starting with that number, count backwards in increments of 7. And it actually drives all the blood to a little part of the parietal lobe. And at least for a while, you have a relatively still mind. And then you can, so basically the experiment was 12 minutes, although they were in there an hour because you got all these anatomicals to take. But anyway, if you look at your sweetheart, then you count back, then you look at the neutral, then you count back. So it's positive, count back, neutral, count back, positive, count back, da, da, da. And then what we do is we've got 2 controls now, the neutral and the count back, and we put all the scans of the person and then all the scans of all the people together, and we cancel out, we put them with the neutral scans, we cancel out what they have in common, probably the visual things, and leaving the brain in love. And what we found was activity in this reward system. And particularly the ventral tegmental area, a little factory near the base of the brain that actually produces dopamine and sends it to other brain regions. And also part of the caudate nucleus, which is the size of a medium-sized shrimp, really, on either side of the head. And basically what I learned from this was that romantic love is not an emotion. There's lots of emotions involved, and we did see activity in other parts of the brain associated with emotion. And we saw a lot of cortical activity. You're certainly thinking when you're in love. But the most powerful things that occur are in areas associated with drive, with wanting, with craving, with motivation, with focused attention, with elation. And that's what made me begin to realize that this was a basic mating system that evolved, uses many parts of the brain, but it's basically a drive. And I think it's a very powerfully basic drive too. It can be more powerful than the drive to live. It's certainly more powerful, I think, than the sex drive under most circumstances. And it evolved for a very powerful reason, to start the mating process. And of course, as Darwin said, if you have 4 children and I have no children, you live on and I die out. So, the brain is really not necessarily built to win on Wall Street. It is built to reproduce.
Is it a residue of a more primitive drive? I mean, is it like a sublimated, almost like sublimation? Is it a form? Is it a residue of a biological drive that then takes the form in another form in this kind of ideational kind of conception?
I think the ideation is part of it. Basically, if one were to really reduce the brain to 3 very broad basic parts, you'd have the cognitive regions, you'd have the limbic areas associated with the emotions, and you'd have areas associated with drive. And I think, and quite clearly, all 3 basic, broad regions of the brain are involved. And I think that they can affect each other. Let's say you walk into a bar and somebody looks very attractive, and you suddenly feel beginning of the tingling of romantic love, and then you discover that they're a baby killer, or they murdered their mother, or I don't know, they're a sword swallower in the circus, and you say, I don't think so, I'm not going to fall in love with them, and so the cortical dampens the motivational, et cetera, et cetera. So I think they're all going to play with each other.
So the striatum that you so indelicately described is the size of a shrimp.
Yeah.
And by the way, I know certain neuroanatomists that would commit suicide if they heard.
Maybe I'm wrong.
So that's a motor control system, isn't it? In other words, it's known as a primary the caudate, a primary motor control system separate from the motor controls that come from the cerebral cortex.
But now they're thinking that it's more. If you spoke to Lucy Brown, that's what she would have come in, and she's the neuroscientist on our project. She would have said, that's been the standard thing, that it was only motor, and now we're finding all sorts of emotional and motivational responses associated with different parts of it.
So what about the people who have been rejected?
Oh, we found activity, and this hasn't been announced at all, we found activity in 4 regions associated with addiction. The nucleus accumbens, and parts of the cortex, which I don't remember, I could tell you as soon as I get home. And but big time activity in the nucleus accumbens in exactly the same regions associated with cocaine addiction. And when you think of it, romantic love is I think it's a very powerful addiction. A wonderful addiction when things are going well, and a perfectly horrible addiction when things are going poorly. But it's got all of the basic characteristics of addiction. You do inappropriate things. You delude yourself. You have to have more and more and more of the person. You have terrible withdrawals when things don't work out, and even relapse. I have a girlfriend who. It was about 8 months later. She had been rejected, and she was really suffering, and she was beginning to get over it. And she was driving along in her car, and she heard a song that reminded her of the man. And boom, the craving came back, the desire to drive by his house, to give him a call, to send a note, etc. So I think it's one of the most powerfully addictive substances on earth. It's interesting. It has distinctions from other systems, and I think that the sooner we begin to realize that in the medical community and also in the educational community. For example, I had a student at Rutgers who just suddenly didn't show up for class for about 6 weeks, and I think most professors would say he was just lazy, and somebody came in and said, well, he's really suffering from rejection in love, and I realized this man can't get out of bed. It's worse than a broken leg for him.
Siri, are we making any sense? Does your apartment house in Oslo have a doorman?
Yeah. Because I've just put my next book to bed, which is Why You Fall in Love with One Person Rather Than Another. And in that I had read about. There's a lot of studies of why American scientists want to know about the psychological and economic and sociological forces that hold a couple together. And there was a recent meta-analysis of 470 studies, and they have found no personality traits that but wait till you, because you're on the right track. There's many reasons that we fall in love with one person rather than another, and we stay with them because we're the same socioeconomic background, same general level of intelligence, same general level of good looks, same religious values, etc. There's all kinds of sociological reasons that we might stay together, but there's no data that shows that any particular personality traits combine to sustain long-term love. And the only thing that they have actually found that does seem to sustain it is what they call positive illusions. And if you just sustain your belief in spite of all reality that she is young, beautiful, smart, loving, all of that, those are the ones that stay together.
I guess that's what transference is.